I'm John Banther, and this is Classical Breakdown. From WETA Classical in Washington, we are your guide to classical music. In this episode, I am joined by WETA Classical's Linda Carducci, and we're exploring the dramatic life of Italian composer Giuseppe Verdi. And there is a lot to get into, from his nearly exclusive opera career to his failure to get into conservatory, personal tragedy, and even his political motivations that in part led to the unification of Italy. And stay with us to the end as we have 3 opera recommendations too from each period of Verdi's life. Okay, Linda, let's start with a pop quiz. And I know you love Verdi and you love opera, so for you, this should be easy. And this is multiple choice. Okay, so I'm going to play for you a clip, and you say, is this A, Verdi's magnificent opera Nabucco featuring Maria Callas's stunning 1949 live performance in Napoli, or is this a clip from a soccer match? Well, Linda, what do you think? Is it A or B?
I don't know. That's a hard one. It's a toss-up.
Well, I'm a little surprised. You already know the answer. We went over this already.
We did.
It's hard to believe. That is actually a performance from an opera with Maria Callas singing too.
Amazing. That just shows you the passion that the Italians had for opera. This was in Napoli, and of course the great Maria Callas. But it also shows the love for Verdi. He had such wonderful melodies that we hear in Nabucco. So I think either one the Italians are very passionate about.
And Va Pensiero is the tune that gets everyone riled up, especially in Nabucco. So we're going to explore his life, and this is a little bit different than other composers because he's like the most opera composer maybe that we've really dug into. He's written a couple of songs, even fewer sacred works. His Requiem is the most known otherwise. But even now we're hearing a song from his 6 romances published in 1836, 1838, all before his first opera. But he is just an opera composer.
He is, and in addition to that, he had a very interesting life. I think what we will see with these songs that you're playing, and also later on when we delve into the opera, is that he had an extraordinary talent for writing melodies. We hear that in his early works, but boy, they really shone in his later works. His stuff is full of melodies.
And these are melodies that people know, whether or not they realize it or not, from all kinds of media and culture. So let's dive into his early life. Of course, he was born, and this happened on October 9th, 1813, near Busseto. And this is like an hour and a half drive south of Milan. His upbringing seemed pretty middle class, and that's actually different from what Verdi was trying to portray later on in life. The music historian Roger Parker said that Verdi's parents, quote, belonged to families of small landowners and traders, certainly not the illiterate peasants from which Verdi later liked to present himself as having emerged. Carlo Verdi, the father, was energetic in furthering his son's education, something Verdi tended to hide in his later life. The picture emerges of youthful precocity, eagerly nurtured by an ambitious father, and of a sustained, sophisticated, and elaborate formal education. A couple of things here. We always see, people who get really, famous, they try to downplay their early life. Verdi saying, my parents were illiterate peasants or something. But it sounds like they were middle class, just your normal average people at this time.
It does, and he was able to get a wonderful music education, too. I think it's worth noting, though, that this village where he lived, which was somewhat in northern Italy, was under control of the French at the time that he was born and was an infant.
Yeah.
And it was a very turbulent time because the French would come in and indiscriminately kill people. Verdi grew up in that environment. His mother used to hide him in the barn as an infant when the French troops would be coming through to protect him.
Yeah.
What if he had whimpered? Children
Right.
are going to do that. He may have not survived. And Verdi knew that. I think he always knew that in the back of his mind, that, he was it was a sliver of hope in some cases.
And it's an awful story we see today, and we know what happens in those situations, and it can be very, very dark for everyone in hiding. But Verdi escapes this, and his father is eagerly pushing for his music education. We don't have a lot of information. Part of that is their I guess, middle class. They're not, wealthy like the Mendelssohns, where there's all this documentation and things going on. But we know he's learning the organ. We know he gets this small piano, like a spinet, and he's also singing. And he's doing pretty well because for the local church, at one point, he's like 8 years old. He takes over for organ duties, and this is like a paid position. No, this isn't like the Notre Dame or something, but that is still something to be doing when you're in your single digits, playing at the local church organ. And then he was writing music as well, Linda, but it sounds like nothing survives from this time. Even for the town orchestra or band, we don't have anything.
No, but it's a wonderful upbringing to know organ, to know piano, to know theory, to know melody. Maybe this is where he got his great love and talent and melody.
But sometimes that is not enough, because as he's growing up and he has these youthful musical abilities, of course, you think, well, it's time for me to go to conservatory, right, Linda? And so he's 18 years old, and they look at him like, no. Why, you're 18. Why would we let you in? You're 18, and you already have some playing problems still. Totally different time compared to now.
Yes, this was the Milan Conservatory.
Mm-hmm. Today, no conservatory is going to accept you unless you have a high school degree. But for a long time, you were 14 or 13 or 15, maybe later, you were already in conservatory. The only school in this country that did that, I think, was Curtis. And now, I don't think it has to be a very special circumstance, I think, for like a 10 or 12-year-old to be admitted to Curtis. Unless you're from another country, I think. But that's to say, he goes there, he's 18, he's already too late, and they think, you're not playing well enough already, so bye.
So they rejected him,
Yeah.
which has a great irony a little bit later on in his life. After he became very famous at his older age, they came to the great maestro Giuseppe Verdi, the Milan Conservatory did, and asked for his approval to name a building after Verdi.
Yeah.
You know what he said? No. He refused. He said that since they rejected him when he was young, he's now going to reject them, wouldn't give them the honor of having his name on the building.
And, I always find this stuff funny because someone probably went to Verdi and said, come on, Giuseppe. that was like 40 years ago. You were 18, and maybe the person even asking him wasn't even born when that happened. Or something, but
Yeah.
But what's funny is the school did not hesitate when Verdi dies in 1901. They immediately changed the name. I love that. So what happens? He doesn't get into the conservatory, but he does go to Milan. It is the big city. La Scala, the opera house, is there. And he starts to study with Vincenzo Lavigna, if I can say that right. And this person has a job at La Scala that still exists today and all over, although less so today. And that's what we call a rehearsal pianist. This is someone who is playing the piano and rehearsing and preparing the singers before the general rehearsals begin. The conductor was probably there as well, but this is someone playing and getting everyone ready for the actual rehearsals to come. So I think this is also a good thing for Verdi to learn and study from the beginning, because it kind of feels like his career is kind of like starting in the mailroom type of idea.
Yes, that's right. But some of these were vocal students, too. So he was getting his feet wet now in the world of vocal music, of maybe listening to how people were being coached vocally.
Yeah, that is a very important thing. I'm glad you bring that up, and that's just observing. Part of being a tuba player means you're sitting in the back and you are watching. And I don't like to read in rehearsal. And so you can watch the conductor rehearsing everyone, and you can see how different people or different instruments react to whatever expressions they're doing on the front. And it sounds like, Verdi's on the side watching that, learning all this stuff with these operas that he's rehearsing or whatever. And then, I like that.
What a nice education for him.
Yes. And then Verdi does get that same job with a local amateur choral group. And that's what I mean by, very much starting in the mailroom, starting from the bottom. He's 21 years old in 1834, and he ventures back south down to Busseto, and he becomes the conductor for the local philharmonic for much of that year. Then he returns to Milan in 1835, and then goes right back to Busseto in 1836. And this is where it all kind of seems like it's all just settling into place. He moves back to Busseto. He gets a teaching position at the school for music. He gets married in 1836. He has 2 kids in 1837, 1838. It sounds like, Linda, he is just living his life in his 20s. Just, it's not remarkable, it's not unremarkable, but it's just living his life.
That's right. His wife, Margarita, was the daughter of one of his patrons.
Okay. Now, 1839, he is in his late 20s, and that's where I think it's like he gets his first big break as a composer, because he is able to get an opera staged that he wrote at La Scala in Milan, and that's Oberto Conte di San Bonifacio. And it was a moderate success, it sounds like, Linda. It had 13 additional performances, and this led to Verdi getting a contract from the opera house for like 3 more operas.
So what a great encouragement for him. Of course, Italy loves opera, and they loved opera. So I could see, yes, they were interested in what this young man named Giuseppe Verdi was doing.
And there's a lot more new opera, especially back then. And I think it's helpful to think about this opera industry at this time in a similar way to the movie industry, at least until, in the last 10 years. When you have a box office hit, it stays in the theaters longer, or it did back in the day, I remember, with like these extra screenings. Or if it was an amazing movie, it comes back. Like, I think they just played Jaws again at a big theater near me. They do these re-screenings. So I kind of think there's something similar there with opera as well. And so Verdi, he's young and he writes something and they see, yeah, this works. Let's have some more. But this is where things go really, really tragic for Giuseppe Verdi. Both of his children die in 1837 and in 1838, and then his wife would die in 1840 at age 26. Just a few months after her death, his second opera premiered, Un Giorno di Regno, and it sounds like it was just a failure. Verdi's 27, he's devastated, he's lost his family, and he feels like his composing life is completely over. It sounds like this is really the rock bottom for him.
Yeah, these are tragedies that happened in great succession, just a couple of years to the young Giuseppe Verdi.
Yeah.
He went into great grief, especially, well, at first about losing his children, because they were only infants. They didn't get a chance to even really grow up.
Right.
And then losing his wife, who he loved, a year later. It set him into a great sense of grief and despair. And that's when he said, music is over for me. I will never write one more note.
Wow. But do we see some of these aspects play out in how he does write later? Because we see that in, I think of movie directors with some personal themes, like relationships that you find through a lot of their films. Is something like that with Verdi?
Yes, that's a very good important point, too. The sorrow of his losing his children is shown in his operas all the way straight through his entire career. In fact, one hallmark of Verdi operas, and anyone will tell you this, is his exploration of a father-daughter relationship. Not so much the father-son, but the father-daughter. We see it very much in Rigoletto, but it's in several of his other ones. And he explores themes of loss, of great affection, redemption, coming together, reunion, and in some cases, sense of obligation. But we see it in several of his operas, this father-daughter relationship.
Okay. And it is a tragedy that sounds like it's as old as time, Linda, and it's something that we see happen today with people and tragedy. And some people just don't recover, or they can't return to the previous life, or they dive in headfirst and just absorb themselves in that. But for Verdi, a year and a bit later, in 1841, at the urging of opera impresario and librettist Bartolomeo Merelli, encouraged Verdi to start working on an opera, and that was Nabucco. And this would be an explosive success, I think, in La Scala in 1842. And to kind of demonstrate that, it was put on again like that same year or later that year at La Scala. It was performed all over Europe. And then in 1848, it was premiered in New York. And just to think about that, this is when the New York Philharmonic is in its infancy. They don't even have a conductor. There's no conductor. And they were just trying to give an American premiere of Beethoven's Ninth. Now, decades later, but Verdi's opera just happened, and they're trying to figure out, how do we get this to happen right now?
Yeah, it's an amazing change, isn't it? Because he loses his family in 1840. 1841, just a year later, he's approached about this. And he resisted at first. He said no. He was still in grief. He said, no, I don't want to have anything to do with music. they persisted. He finally gave in. And with all of this success, he said, quote, "This is the opera with which my artistic career really begins." And though there were many difficulties to fight against, it is certain that Nabucco was born under a lucky star.
Wow.
Those are the words of Giuseppe Verdi.
And this is the little bit we heard at the very beginning where it sounded like a soccer match. This contains that famous chorus, Va Pensiero. And people were going crazy for that chorus, not just because it's just a really good chorus. Right, Linda? There's something extra here because part of Verdi is political. We can't talk about Verdi without talking about politics because of, well, one, he was an elected official at one point, and he was part of the Risorgimento, which is the unification of Italy. We'll get into that, but this is an opera which people, I think, really identified with, and maybe we can look at some of those aspects.
Sure. Nabucco is based on the biblical stories of Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon. He captured Jerusalem, he destroyed the Hebrew temple, and he took the Hebrews slaves. So the Hebrews are singing Va Pensiero, fly wings of thoughts on gold. It's their collective yearning to return to their homeland. And we can see that sort of mirrored in what was going on with the Italian nation at the time. It wasn't a nation, it was a little groups of principalities and dukedoms and foreign powers who wanted to have a homeland, which we will talk about in depth a little later.
I think this chorus demonstrates something about Verdi, and that is, for me, it really feels like his music is realistic and it's something for the people. Mm-hmm. If we think of other choruses, an easy one is the Pilgrim's Chorus and Tannhäuser by Wagner. It grows very steadily. It's this very stately theme that grows. But that's not really what happens. I know it's a different situation with that, but no one really sings like that, together as a crowd or something. If you've ever sang drinking songs or karaoke or been at Fenway Park during a game and everyone takes a deep breath to belt out the next line, I love that because that's what Verdi does. We have sudden, subito loud sections, which it feels like that is of the people, everyone taking a deep breath.
For sure. It's absolutely beautiful. I think it shows Verdi's talent for melody. It's a beautiful, very moving, yearning anthem. And by the way, may I say that when Verdi ultimately died in 1901, 300,000 people packed the streets, took to foot in Milan as his funeral procession passed, and they were all singing Va Pensiero as Verdi's coffin passed in the carriage. Very, very moving scene.
Oh, and you said you found like a video clip of this too.
I did, from 1901. I'm not sure where I found it, possibly Facebook, but there are certainly still photos all over the web.
Okay, and I'm going to track that down as best I can, and I'll put that on the show notes page at classicalbreakdown.org. And I think Toscanini was there too, like conducting some more music with like 1,000 singers as well. Which
Wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah. Another thing with Verdi's music that we hear, even here with the opera Nabucco, and maybe you can help me out with this, Linda, is that it feels like the recitatives are also pushing forward. We know he's really making the action and the momentum always pushing forward in his music. And already by this time, we've long dispensed with the harpsichord. I'm thinking of old Vivaldi or Mozart where they're talking for a while. There's some harpsichord. It really settles down. It kind of like gets really low energy. Here, he's using the orchestra, and that's not so new, but he never lets the singers or the orchestra settle. There's a little bit of stress or something that always makes the recitatives even feel like they're going to move forward. I very often just, if I listen to something that's like a recitative with the harpsichord, I read ahead,
Yeah, recitatives with harpsichord. Recitative, we should say, are sort of like spoken speech.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very prominent during the 18th century. Mozart used them, Gluck used them, all those opera composers from the 18th century used them. But with Verdi, we're starting to see an evolution. Actually, we started to see it a little bit before him with Donizetti and Rossini, too, in the 19th century. But yes, with Verdi, there's this constant momentum now to keep the drama going, keep the narrative going with the music. Don't stop.
Yeah.
And his operas really, at this start in Nabucco, were not so much showcases for the singers
Hmm.
as they had been before with like Rossini and Donizetti. Now the focus is on the drama and the music to support the drama.
Yeah. If I think of Mozart and some of the, park and bark aspect, you stand and you sing, a lot of the music, like if you think of the Queen of the Night, the arias are super difficult. They're agile, they're virtuosic, much in a way like I think Mozart would be playing the violin. With Verdi, there's less agility, there's less, I think maybe, technical fireworks. The melodies are more memorable. They're a little bit easier to sing in terms of like, just humming and singing. But the difference is Verdi requires incredible stamina and power, I think.
Yes.
It's like easier melodies or whatever because they're not technical fireworks. And I just love it.
This shows us now Verdi is going into very rich melodies, but not so much a showcase for the singers, as you were just saying. They don't stand and park and bark and say to the audience, look at me, how beautifully I'm going to sing this aria, or with technical virtuosity. Instead, Verdi wanted to integrate the singers into the music because he had a focus now on the characters and their personalities.
Not a lot of encores, I guess, in Verdi.
No, not a lot of applause. Sometimes there's no applause either in the middle of it, like there would be, say, with Mozart.
So we are in his early period, in his early success. The following 7 years after this, he writes a total of 12 operas. And it sounds like that is just all he's doing. And we group these together as his early period. And more about the sound. These have that Verdi sound, but it does sound like it's pared down a bit. The orchestration isn't quite as big. Thinking of like Aida and all the resources there. Some of the musical devices to propel the motion, they're not quite there yet. Here it feels like there's the action, okay, turn the page. Action, turn the page. Later on, he does things like, I love how he uses the piccolo to depict weather and lightning in between scenes in Rigoletto. But I think we still hear that here where the drama is moving, but it's ding, turn the page, ding, turn the page.
That's true. As we will see, Verdi will evolve as a composer and try to have a more realistic form of drama, almost as if you're watching a play with gorgeous music that is supporting it.
Yeah, it's like it's that's why I think of it like with movies. It's a full experience. Yeah. And Verdi does meet someone else in the 1840s, and that is Giuseppina Strepponi. And I think they met originally on the Nabucco production, and then again later in Paris in 47. They quickly fall for each other. They're in love. They move in together, and in the town of Busseto, it sounds like that was a little bit of stress for Strepponi. I don't know what Verdi was doing to alleviate that or nothing. I don't know. But she was being like ostracized on all kinds of things because they didn't have a marriage ceremony.
Yeah, they were living as common law husband and wife. Strepponi was a singer. She was starting to end her career around the time that she and Verdi settled down. But she was no stranger. She had children previously. So there was some contention there in the small conservative town where they lived that this wasn't appropriate for them to be living together, which we will see a little bit later on in just a few years with La Traviata, and we'll see why Verdi was so drawn to that play.
Okay.
Because it mirrored his own life.
All right. So before we move on to like the middle period, what is a work that you would recommend for people from this early period? And these are recommendations for me too, because I only know like the big, maybe 5 or 6 operas of Verdi.
Yeah. Well, I would say if you're going to listen to an early one, it is Nabucco, because that was where he really made his breakthrough. It is a little bit more mature than his earlier operas. And of course, we have that wonderful chorus of the Hebrew slaves, Va Pensiero, that is just so beautiful. The whole opera is moving. And as you say, it depicts people and their struggles against oppression.
And it is also filled with brass playing. That's a reason why I know that one, because it was also on auditions. Nabucco would be the opening when you have like a playing section of an audition. But there's tons of brass off stage and extra parts too.
Interesting. So would choose then Nabucco from his early period?
I mean, I'm trying to ask you for recommendations. I think so because it's I love the big extra brass stuff that he uses in ways that other composers would do later on, like in the 1860s and 70s, compared to what Verdi's doing here.
So from about 1842, after Nabucco, through 1851, through Rigoletto, just up to Rigoletto, I will say, this is a period that Verdi himself called the Anni de Galera, or the galley years, or could be also interpreted as years of prison. He was now so successful, thanks to Nabucco, that he was getting constant pressures and constant requests for work. So he was racing against time to compose new and direct new operas, one after another. So when one was being produced on the stage, he was working on another one backstage. Now, of course, he would complain about this, but it meant that he was very successful. And added to those pressures, he was always working with the impresarios. He was negotiating with them. There were censors. He was working with the publishers. So it was a very busy but a pressure-filled time for Verdi, that era where he calls his Anni di Galera, the galley years.
I mean, it almost sounds like a carousel of misery trying to write that many operas and premiere them. But no, you're head down, focused on that one. So we'll go into his middle period, about 1851, 1853 to 1871. And it sounds like, yeah, Verdi's already popular. He's written a bunch of things really quickly. Everyone loves it. But, that's not even the best that's yet to come. It sounds like Rigoletto, which happens at the start of what we call his middle period, just changes everything. It blows his popularity into the stratosphere.
Absolutely. By the way, we'll see this as a theme with Verdi's life. Just when we think, okay, now he's finally settled or he's retired, no, he'll come back and with something that's even more blockbuster than before.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
This is a theme in his life. Yeah, Rigoletto is very, very different. He himself said that he wanted to compose this work so that it would be a single thread. We were talking earlier about how some of his early operas were showing an evolution toward momentum.
Yeah.
Rather than stopping and having a singer sing and having the audience applause, which breaks the action. It breaks the momentum. It breaks the narrative. No, he wanted to incorporate now the narrative with the music so that everything was one big experience. We saw this with Wagner, too, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So with Rigoletto, he said he wanted there to be just a single thread in the narrative from the first note to the very end of the note. Very taut, very complex, but lots of wonderful melodies, despite the fact that there were no breaks.
And this must mean there are countless different edits and melodies and things on the cutting room floor, because in anything when you're trying to create something, it is about removing as much as you possibly can until it's going to fall over and, okay, I'll put a piece back.
Good point.
I mean, and it's all gone. He destroyed all kinds of stuff. Or maybe they found their way into another piece or another opera at some point. But yeah, and it sounds like he has Rigoletto and then Il Trovatore and then La Traviata. That's like in a row?
Yeah, in a span of 2.5 years.
That's unbelievable.
It is. And with Rigoletto, by the way, we see the prime example of the father-daughter relationship, a very affectionate relationship in that case, a protective relationship that we know stems from the death of his infant daughter. And also with Rigoletto, by the way, we start to see the problem of censorship that Verdi is going to see through the rest of his life that becomes very irritating to him. The censors were unhappy with him setting Victor Hugo's play called Le Rat s'amuse for Rigoletto because it showed a king and his rather licentious lifestyle. So Verdi said, all right, what if I move the action from France to Italy? And what if I change the character from a king to a duke? Will that satisfy you? And the censor said yes.
And there was something else you mentioned earlier about the relationship with Strepponi and being in one of these operas.
La Traviata.
La Traviata. Okay, tell us about that.
Yeah, La Traviata is also based on a play by Alexandre Dumas fils that was his own story, Alexandre Dumas fis's story, about having a relationship with a courtesan, that he was living with her, and the scorn that they would receive from the public. He wrote a play about it. Verdi based La Traviata on that. La Traviata means the fallen woman. But Verdi said, I'm going to give her honor.
Okay.
The main character, whose name is Violetta. Verdi and Streppone saw the play, Alexandre Dumas' Fils play in Paris, and it rang true to them because they, Verdi and Streppone, were living together without marriage and were facing scorn from their conservative environment where they lived. So he saw a very similar sort of situation with the story of La Traviata. Maybe that's why he was drawn to write an opera about it.
Okay. I mean, at the end of the day, you write what you know, I guess, and what you see and what resonates with you, and how you want to see yourself being depicted up in culture.
And the third one in this great trio is called Il Trovatore, which is a sort of a convoluted, weird story. But to Verdi, it wasn't weird because it involves violence. It involves being confused when you're faced with personal violence and the actions that you take. It wasn't weird to Verdi because that's how he grew up in northern Italy with the French authorities that would pillage the area.
And the theme of people in power and their oppression or abuse of power, that's a common theme for Verdi. And connected to that, we will talk about censorship right after this. Classical Breakdown, your guide to classical music, is brought to you by WETA Classical. Join us for the music anytime, day or night at wetaclassical.org, where you'll also find educational resources like Take Note, the WETA Classical playlist, and our blog, Classical Score. Find all that and more at wetaclassical.org. Well, Linda, it sounds like Verdi was very familiar with there's like that quote, "More money, more problems." That was
Right.
Verdi knew that very well, and because just as we had the Hays Code until 1968, which really limited or prohibited things in movies like depictions of different races being in a relationship, indecent dancing, mocking of religion, it sounds like Verdi had to contend with all of this, Linda, and also with various like actual government authorities from the French and the Austrians and...
Yeah, censorship was something he was always fighting against. It made him miserable. We heard a few examples there with La Traviata and Rigoletto.
Yeah.
There was censorship with Un ballo in maschera. They didn't want to have an assassination of a king on the stage, even though that was the story.
Yeah.
So the censors were injecting themselves into Verdi's life.
Oh, we can't forget to mention, though, with In Ballo and Maschera, because this blew me away when I first saw the opera. It's about this assassination, but they couldn't do that, so it's censored. So it's in Boston, Massachusetts.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what?
yeah.
We're in Boston?
That's right. He moved it to the New World, and he called the main character the governor of Boston.
Yeah, and so for the authorities in Austria, oh, sure, yeah, kill him. That's fine. Don't worry about that. But he really sees this, and it becomes a problem. I think there's one opera where he literally... he left. He said, forget this. Maybe it was Masquerade because he was just like, I'm leaving. He left town. Mm-hmm. And then what we know today, there's lawsuits and countersuits. Eventually he returns and he finishes it and it gets staged. But this is something he's always contending with. And it sounds like these are things that when people are trying to censor or control, what you say, it changes on a moment, on a dime, by design. So he's also having to deal with probably last-minute changes as well.
Could be, and add to this Verdi's lifelong disdain for governmental authorities anyway, mm-hmm. and even clerical authorities. He always distrusted those groups.
Yeah, well, I think many of us do. And now we should talk about Risorgimento, which we talked about just a little bit earlier, because all of this stuff, this censorship, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's not that just... if Verdi was nobody and writing these little stories, nobody would care. But it's because he has this influence and people are going to be seeing this that it sounds like, the government authorities, Austrians or the French or whatever, really, really don't like what's happening. And what is happening is this growing dissent in the populace against, they're forming solidarity against this Austrian control, mm-hmm. and that's Risorgimento, this unification effort. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like Verdi was, for a time, front and center with this, or he provided the musical identity to go along with it.
He did. If you look at Italy at that time, even before him, it wasn't a country. It was not one unified country. It was not the Kingdom of Italy. It was these little groupings, and this section was controlled by Austria, and this section was controlled by the Pope, and this section controlled by Spain, and that section France. Italy said, no, we are a unified people. We have a unified language. We have a unified culture. We want to be one country. So they started this movement called Risorgimento, which means resurgence. And so this was going on, early in Verdi's life, and Verdi supported it. But he became sort of the face and the voice of the Risorgimento because people knew that he was always for the Italian soul and for the Italian everyman.
And it's not just Va Pensiero. There are other tunes as well, like O Thou Palermo from I Vespri Siciliani.
Right.
Something from La Battaglia di Legnano, if I'm saying that right.
That's correct.
Like there's people are shouting in these performances in response.
That's right. One of the things they would shout is Viva Verdi. Now, this was twofold. This was a sort of a double entendre because, yes, they were shouting for Verdi in his wonderful opera, Viva Verdi.
Yeah.
But they were also projecting a code. When saying Verdi, those letters, V-E-R-D-I, stood for something. They stood for Vittorio Emanuele Re di Italia. Those 5 words, if you look at the first letter of each of those 5 words, spells V-E-R-D-I.
Verdi.
And who they were talking about was Vittorio Emanuele, who was then the king of Sardinia. So he was in Italy, and they wanted him to be the new king of Italy. So when they would yell, Viva Verdi, at the end of the operas, they were saying 2 things. Yes, Viva Verdi, he's wonderful, but also let's support the Risorgimento.
I have to admit, Linda, at the end of our Rigoletto episode, you actually gave a little Viva Verdi shout.
I did.
And I thought, well, Linda just likes Verdi, I guess. Oh, right. I didn't realize this second meaning that you're also, this Italian, I don't know, unification pride or something.
Yeah.
But that is very, very interesting. A lot of historians have looked at this and said, yes, he supported it, but it wasn't like some super intentional code, or maybe people weren't shouting Viva Verdi. But, I'm not a history major or anything, but I mean, just to go out on a limb, we heard the people shouting in that concert of Maria Callas.
Yeah.
I mean, have you ever been through check-in at an Italian airport? I mean, it does not take much for me to think that people are shouting Viva Verdi at an Italian opera, right? I mean, it's not too far of a stretch.
No, that's right. Some people will say, well, there's not one particular opera in which Verdi was really supporting Risorgimento, or there's no one particular aria that he's supporting, but it's in general his very presence, and that because he was a symbol of great international acclaim at this point, projecting Italian art throughout Europe. But at the same time, too, he was showing through his operas a unification of people yearning for freedom from oppression. And that's what the Risorgimento movement was showing. We want to be free from the Austrian rule and the French rule. We want to have a united country. And
in 1961, that is what happened. They formed the Kingdom of Italy.
1861.
What did I say?
You said 1961.
Oh, that's a little bit later.
Yeah. Well, in 1861, yes, the Risorgimento movement was finally unified, but it took a few years before they actually captured Rome.
Okay. And it was just before this that in 1859 that Verdi was elected as like a member of a provincial council, and apparently he was also given the head task to meet on their behalf with this King Vittorio Emanuele. Verdi was in this position. He resigned within a year. Apparently, that was part of the plan. He didn't. It was just a temporary thing he was going to do. But he was, I guess, I don't know how they do this or the significance of it, but he was elected to other things too, like an abstentia or something. Like he was in the Italian Senate for a time, but never participated.
I see.
Stuff like that. But it sounds like he is, as you just said, he's like an international star. And if I think of, international opera star in the 19th century, I have to think you've conquered Paris in some way.
Yes.
And it sounds like Verdi, in the now 1850s or 1860s, he's really broken into Paris.
They love him there. And some of his operas were expanded for the Paris stage because Paris audiences liked big grand opera. They liked ballet in their opera. They were listening to people like Giacomo Meyerbeer, who was a French composer who wrote these big, grand, theatrical 19th century operas. And so Verdi would adapt some of his operas for the Paris stage. But he loved Paris.
I find that so amazing. One, that, I think that it was like a requirement that ballet was in your opera. And so I think for some of this, he's writing like a decade or so later more music, or even maybe like an assistant or someone helping out, writing some extra stuff to be the ballet section in these. And how you just take something from Italian to French, I don't understand how you really just do that. There's all kinds of adjustments that have to be made, but that sounds like quite a feat itself.
It does. Verdi worked with various librettists, that is, over his lifetime, people who are writing, that is, the lyrics for him.
Yeah.
And Verdi was tough with them. With some of them, he was very tough, and he would tell them what he wanted in there, or he'd say, no, that doesn't work. But he also said, I want to see the lyrics first before I can write the music. You see, he thought that was very important.
Yeah.
What is being projected in the lyrics? He wanted to match the music to project what the lyrics were saying.
Yeah. I mean, especially in the 18th century and earlier, that wasn't always the case.
Not at all.
No. So what is an opera from this middle period, the 1850s, 60s to 70, that we can recommend?
Well, there's so many wonderful operas in this particular period. I'm going to go to the big three. Of course, that would be Rigoletto, Trovatore, and La Traviata. By the way, Trovatore, it has a wild story, so some people sort of dismiss it, but it has some of the most beautiful music that Verdi wrote. I might go, though, with La Traviata because it's a very intimate work. It was not at first received well because people were expecting grand heroics on the opera stage from Verdi. And here is this intimate story. There's no more than two people on the stage at any time, except for the first opening a party scene, but that's quick.
Yeah.
It has a tinta, which Verdi used to talk about, a tinta meaning an atmosphere or a color of the orchestration that is rather intimate.
Yeah.
As opposed to, say, the tinta of his larger works like Don Carlos or La Forza del Destino, in which there's war and violence, and you have a bigger orchestra and, say, more brass. That tinta is different than the tinta of a small, intimate opera like La Traviata.
It shows that he has the range, too. He's not just writing action movies or love stories or something.
Right. Interesting, in that big three, Rigoletto, Trovatore, and Traviata, he was able to do that. Two big ones, and then this tiny little, very intimate Traviata.
Okay, La Traviata, I'll put something up on the show notes page for that. Now, we're going to his later period. He is now turning almost 60, and he's in his 50s. He's basically at the height of his fame. He slows down. He premieres only 5 operas in the 1860s, which 5 operas in 10 years is still, for many, might be get me off of this ride. I need some time off or something.
Yeah.
But despite all of that, it sounds like, Linda, that Verdi is now ready for his soft life, his soft girl era. I'm just gonna go do something easy. How about I just go pick up farming? I don't understand how you just pick up farming. Is not easy, especially in the 1800s. He has money. He's not out there maybe, picking turnips or something, but still a lot of work.
Yeah, he loved the rural life. He grew up in a rural sort of area. He loved that life. So he and Giuseppina built a home in Sant'Agata, which is not too far from where he grew up. You can see now there's even still his home. It's called the Villa Verdi. But yes, he started buying up property. He was wealthy at this point and loved the rural life. He said he would spend all days just walking from morning until night in a rural area. So yeah, he decided to pick up farming. Okay,
I was going to call him a city slicker for a moment, but maybe he is a little authentic in his rural life.
Yeah.
But he's very involved with everything when it comes to these harvests and the economy of it all. At this time, he would also lose his parents, and that is when him and Giuseppina, they didn't have a child. They adopted his father's great niece, Filomena Maria, who I guess would become the actual heir for Verdi's estate. One of the funny things I think about this with Linda, because I like to think of the other side or the other perspective, there had to have been people, of course, working for Verdi and farming that only knew him in that capacity.
As a farmer.
Yeah, as a farmer who just, because not everyone's into opera.
Right.
Not everyone is driving 2 hours to go see something in Milan. So there's people there they know him as Verdi the farmer. Yeah, he writes music too. I know
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe more than that, but I like that.
They used to say that when people would ask him what he did for a living, he'd say, "I'm just a farmer."
Just a farmer. I harvest melodies and tunes and turnips and beets.
By the way, he was a gourmand too, so he loved to give people food and cook.
Cook, yes.
So it's possible he used some of his harvest for that.
I'll try to find a good recipe because apparently Giuseppina said if people could taste how he composes risotto alla Milanese, the ovations would shower upon him. Apparently that was his specialty. I'll try to find the right recipe. He
Ooh.
said plenty of butter or something. I know there's a whole butter and olive oil thing with it.
Pretty good.
One of the big operas, maybe one of the biggest, or people that really identify with Verdi, comes around this time, and that is the opera Aida. And just one of the funny things, I guess this was it originally a commission for the Suez Canal that didn't happen?
Yes, the Khedive of Egypt was a great opera fan. He loved Verdi, and he asked him to compose something for the opening of the Suez Canal. That never came to fruition, but Verdi then wrote an opera for the Opera House in Cairo, Egypt.
Yeah.
And the story is based in ancient Egypt. It's a love story, a forbidden love story.
But how much fun would it be if we had something from Verdi that was like played on ships passing through a canal?
Yeah.
That would be fun.
Yeah,
That'd
yeah.
be fun.
Aida is interesting, too, because it shows, for one thing, Verdi's great love of Paris. In fact, he wanted this opera, Aida, to be premiered in Paris because it's big.
Yeah, it's a big grand thing.
Grand opera. When we talk about grand opera, we mean big sets, elaborate costumes, a big chorus, a big orchestra, lots of singers, a big cast. This is the kind of stuff going on in Paris. And Verdi did this with Aida.
And when it would be premiered in 1871, Aida, it sounds like Verdi was not happy. He wasn't there. And in fact, a lot of the people he wished were there weren't there. It wasn't the actual public and people of Cairo. It was the royalty. It was dignitaries and all this stuff. Verdi did not like that.
No, Verdi, as we said earlier, he had a distrust for governmental authorities, for regal people, for royalty, even for clerics.
Makes me like Verdi a little bit more. What's a little bit different, though, is now we get to a point where there's no opera. For nearly a decade, from 1872 to 1881, there's no opera, but we get his Requiem in 1874.
Yeah, the question has been raised, he had such great success with Aida. Why did he abandon it at that point?
Yeah.
And sometimes, when you think that you've done the best you can, now is the time, leave it.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is he did. He left it and he went back to Sant'Agata in the rural life to be a farmer, but he was unhappy. He was sort of depressed. He was unhappy with the state of politics in Italy. He was unhappy with the state of music, where music was going. He was unhappy with the theaters. So he was at home, but he wasn't necessarily happy.
Yeah. It sounds like he is frustrated with a lot of the same things. That's I think Bill Bukowski has a quote, the more things change, the more they stay the same, something like that. But he does write his Requiem. There's a whole thing. He wrote part of like a movement for a Requiem for Rossini, I think, for like for a funeral anniversary. But in 1874, he writes his full Requiem, and it is one of the most towering works. I've played it, and it is one of the most like energetic, passionate things that you can play with chorus. And we'll have to do a whole episode on it at some point for sure. Yeah.
Did you find it to be operatic in nature?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of parts where you are sitting and you're just watching the singers up at the front, which is very nice. That's not something, I mean, for a tuba player, that's generally when you're not playing. But then with the huge choruses, the bump, that huge section, it's a huge thing that you get to play.
It's a wonderful work.
But unfortunately, also for this time, you mentioned he's a little bit depressed and everything, even though he has this requiem. He's pulling away from like community. He doesn't want to be involved with the press. He's very private. He never really does like a bunch of big interviews
No.
or like that. We see tons of that from like Tchaikovsky and even Brahms, but not with Verdi. And it sounds like, yeah, he was even pulling away from community, saying these people, they just want a piece of me, or they want to bother me with some music or something else. I mean, I guess like Brahms or Rossini, he can't stay retired forever. He starts working on opera, I guess maybe a little in private on his own, and he has a few more premiered. I think the last one was Falstaff, right?
Yes. So when he was retired after Aida, his friends knew that there was too much still of a good thing with Verdi.
Okay, yeah.
He shouldn't be retired yet. And his publisher, who made money on the sale of Verdi scores, wanted Verdi to continue composing, of course.
Yeah, everybody wants a piece of the profit.
They do. So they knew how much Verdi loved William Shakespeare. Verdi was a huge Shakespeare fan throughout his life and had already composed an opera earlier in his career called Macbeth, which, by the way, is wonderful. I saw it last year at the Washington National Opera. It's a wonderful opera. But anyway, they knew that they could maybe snag him, lure him out of retirement with a Shakespeare play. And sure enough, they proposed Othello, which Verdi calls Otello, Italian. And that was too much for Verdi to resist.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy that he came out of retirement to do that. It took many years. It took him many years to write that work. But boy, I think it's his towering achievement. And Boito, who was also a composer, Boito was friends with Verdi and wrote the libretto to Otello. And some people think that is the best libretto of any of Verdi's operas.
And when you read about it, it sounds like the premieres, like Falstaff was the bigger premiere out of all of them.
Yeah, Falstaff came afterwards because after the great success of Otello, again, Verdi had wonderful success. Again, he retired.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're seeing this retirement pattern in his life.
Yeah.
He retired again, and they lured him out again with another Shakespeare play, this time Falstaff, which was based on really a character from 2 Shakespeare plays.
It almost sounds like abuse. I mean, they're pulling poor Verdi out of bed.
Each time it took several years for Verdi. He was in the 70s at this point. This time, it took him a couple of years to write both Otello and Falstaff. And what's interesting is Falstaff is a comedy. Now, who would have thought that the great Giuseppe Verdi, after all these dramatic operas, would end his entire career with a comedy?
It's a comedy itself. And one of the things is he's like 80 when Falstaff is premiered, and the premiere is massive. The ticket prices are like 2-3 dozen times higher than they're supposed to be. It's all royalty. There's crowds everywhere. I read at like one performance he like hid in a broom closet for a time.
Oh boy.
And again, talking about his range, he has longevity. How many composers, Rossini or Vivaldi especially, are unknown and undesired by the time they're in their 60s or 70s?
Yeah.
Here is Verdi writing a smash hit.
Oh.
At 80, and people are, not just, they can't get enough.
Especially Otello. Otello is a masterpiece. He was long retired after, before he wrote that.
And then he gets to some really important work in the 1890s, and that is more philanthropic or charity work. Some of the things he was doing was like writing music to benefit a group, like there's a big earthquake in Sicily, and he wrote music, some songs or something, to which the profits could help these people. One of the great things he did was he planned and built and endowed a retirement home for musicians, because many musicians, even today, famous musicians, you don't have money to not die in poverty. Even composers. I mean, there's like film composers right now, in very poor living conditions, just because that's, how life turns out for many musicians. But Verdi turns that around with this retirement home, which opens after he dies, and these great retired singers and musicians move in. Students even come from abroad to be there and study with them. Yeah,
it's still there in Milan. This shows, I think, John, a pattern of Verdi wanting to help the common person. Not so much being somebody who reveres royalty and great military generals, but wanting to help the common people. We saw this as a theme in his operas. We see it here in him starting a retirement home for musicians.
And this retirement home would even be the subject of a great movie, not like a documentary, but like a great feature film with Maggie Smith. I think it was called Quartet or The Quartet.
I think it's just Quartet.
Yeah.
It is a wonderful film. It came out in 2012, so it's not that old. And it's about a home for retired opera singers in Italy. And these 4 specific opera singers, actually the entire retirement home is planning a big fundraising gala. And they said, well, let's do it to celebrate the birthday of Giuseppe Verdi. And so they all sing Verdi works for this gala. And it's just wonderful.
Oh, yeah, because they want to put the quartet together. There's all kind of drama,
Yeah.
all the singer stuff you can imagine of the emotions and everything. It's all there. Definitely recommend.
The retirement home that is in this movie called Quartet is patterned after Verdi's Casa di Riposo, the home for retired musicians in Milan.
And that's Verdi's life. He would die in 1901 of a stroke at age 87. And as Linda described, this incredible funeral procession that I'll try to put some video up of as well. And Toscanini even conducting like 1,000 singers. I imagine you couldn't hear those singers.
Probably not. But they were singing Va Pensiero. I mean, I just think that is just so moving. This is how much they loved Verdi. And shops were closed for days because of it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's all I have for Giuseppe Verdi. Do you have anything else, Linda?
Well, I do want to just mention that this past year I had the great opportunity to work with a Verdi scholar who is based in Washington, D.C., Saul Lilienstein. We did 6 blogs.
That's right.
About 6 different Verdi operas, and you can see all of those on our blog, which is called Classical Score.
Okay, and I'll take each one of those and I'll put a link on the show notes page so everyone can see that all in one spot.
Oh, thank you.
Beautiful.
Other than that, I say Viva Verdi.
Viva Verdi. Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown, your guide to classical music. For more information on this episode, visit the show notes page at classicalbreakdown.org. You can send me comments and episode ideas to classicalbreakdown@weta.org. And if you enjoyed this episode, leave a review in your podcast app. I'm John Banther. Thanks for listening to Classical Breakdown from WETA Classical.